Interested in more cinema of meaning? Each month we have an entire bonus episode available exclusively on our creator-owned streaming service, Nebula. So far we've talked about Sam Mendes' 1917, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece 2001: A Space Odyssey. In addition to those and any future bonus exclusive episodes, you'll also get access to our regular episodes ad-free and a week early when you listen on Nebula. The best way to get Nebula is with the Curiosity Stream bundle. You can learn more about that in the description below or go to curiositystream.com/cinema of meaning. You can even plug the Nebula feed into a normal podcast player and listen wherever you like. Sign up today to get more cinema of meaning and access to all the other great content on Nebula. If you're enjoying Cinema of Meaning, you can now support the podcast on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/cinema of meaning for more information about the rewards that you can get when you become a patron, including access to our Discord community where you can discuss episodes with other listeners and Tom and I. Welcome to Cinema of Meaning, a podcast from myself, Thomas Flight, and my fellow video essayist, Tom van der Linden, from the channel Like Stories of Old, that seeks to explore the depths of what cinema has to offer. This week, we're talking about the Coen Brothers masterpiece, I'll go ahead and call it, No Country for Old Men. I guess I'm tipping my hand to what I think about this movie. This is one of my favorites from the Coen Brothers, I think. Tom, how do you feel about No Country for Old Men, and what made you interested in discussing this one?
I pretty much agree with you. So it's going to be a nice conflict-free episode, I think. I saw No Country for Old Men the first time when I was 16, I think, right when it came out. And for me, at least, it was one of the first movies it kind of had its foot in both worlds. With both worlds being like more conventional cinema that I was used to, but also it did some very subversive things that I wasn't used to. And that, in that sense, it really was a movie that got me interested in story structure, I think.
Yeah.
Or at least in why and how movies divert from traditional structures and what that means. And I don't know, it was a movie that intrigued me, but at the same time, it wasn't alienating as some other art house movies can be when you have no experience with art house movies. So it was for me at least, it was this nice gateway movie into more abstract or just non-conventional forms of cinema, which that's what really made it interesting to me at the time, at least. I think I watched it 2 or 3 times, not too long after each other. I didn't revisit it until last week. So that's more than 10 years later.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It had been a while for me as well.
Yeah. So yeah, that was fun. It was definitely, I think it still holds up very well. It's just, it's still very, I think now it feels more existential almost than it did back then.
Yes.
To me, at least, it was this, back in the day, it was just an unconventional Western-ish type story, but now it feels much more subdued in some ways, but also more evocative in others. Like it's more, the first time I saw it, I connected more to like Louis Mass's character, whereas now I feel like I'm watching it as Tommy Lee Jones's character, like more reflective and more like wondering what it was all about and what the meaning is. And so yeah, I think that there's still to this day there's some interesting themes to dig into, and it's just a really well-crafted story. It still is, and has some compelling characters that I'm sure we're going to discuss, and lots of stuff that's worth watching this movie for.
Yeah. I also had a similar experience of revisiting this and enjoying it the first time, but coming back to it and I think discovering more depth there than at least I perceived the first time, or maybe just a shift in perspective that's happened because I've watched more film that is in this similar way, kind of ambiguous and subversive narratively, or I've just changed as a person. I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Like perhaps the films that I've watched since I first watched No Country for Old Men have also changed me. And then, we have this circular feedback loop or whatever. But I do remember this being a movie that stuck out to me as being the like ambiguity of the ending, and they're very much playing with this dissatisfaction that in terms of resolving the conflict and how the story plays out structurally. Like it's skipping a beat at the end and doing that on purpose to kind of leave you with this like feeling of unresolved tension. I remember this movie being one of the first movies I watched that really did that in a very effective way, and where I didn't dislike it. I kind of understood why that was happening and what point that played in the movie. I've seen a lot of movies that do similar things since then, but I think it was an interesting introduction into that kind of mode of storytelling where it's like, we're going to be sort of postmodern in how we like subvert this narrative, but it didn't feel like just bad storytelling. It felt like it had a purpose. And now revisiting it and knowing where it's going, and there is so much that still holds your attention and makes it very entertaining on a conventional level. I think there's characters that are really interesting and entertaining. The Coen Brothers are so good at writing little bit parts or crafting a character that is just fun to look at on screen. And we get a lot of that. But then there's also beautiful cinematography from Roger Deakins and just like pure suspense. It really stood out to me. There's like a set piece at the beginning of it, not the beginning, in the middle of this movie that has almost no score. It's just a long, extended, protracted kind of chase sequence. I'm thinking specifically of like from the moment when Llewellyn shows up at the hotel until kind of there's a sequence there that until that's resolved is so tense.
Yeah.
Even knowing exactly what was going to happen, I was on edge watching it. So it's just masterfully crafted in terms of how the filmmaking kind of draws you in and into the suspense of those moments. And so I think that helps propel it and helps make it feel more palatable. Like you were saying, like it has that kind of art house subversion of narrative.
Yeah.
But it also is an exciting, suspenseful kind of neo-Western.
It's just an almost fun like cat and mouse game between the main character Lewin Maas and Anton Chigurh, who's hunting him. Speaking to the suspense, it does that annoyingly effective thing where you basically have a timer and then it goes like 5, 4, 3, and then but then it slows. It shows the last seconds, but then it kind of slows time down where so it feels like you're like the main character is just running out of time, but then no, he just got out.
Yeah.
I think that's the part where he's fixing like he has the money stashed in the vent, and Anton Chigurh, he's driving up to the motel and he's pulling like the tent poles together to get out his bag, and then it looks like he's gonna be too late, and like there's no way he has enough time to fix it before Anton shows up. But then that's where the movie does its time trickery, where it's it's unrealistic because there's no way he's gonna make it, but it's only because of movie magic that he does, and it's annoying, but it somehow it works really well.
It works, yeah. This episode of Cinema of Meaning is brought to you by MUBI. MUBI is an online hand-curated streaming cinema with exceptional movies from all around the world, and it's available all around the world. MUBI is like having your own personal online film festival. They carefully pick and feature a brand new movie every day for you to watch with an explanation of why it's significant and worth checking out. MUBI is a great place to go just to discover something new and interesting to watch. That's what really sets it apart from other streaming services for me. Recently, I watched We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is a dark but boldly directed, fascinating movie by Lynn Ramsey that stars Tilda Swinton. The use of color and sound in this movie is amazing. You can check that out on MUBI in the US, or you can explore their library wherever you are in the world for free when you sign up for an extended 30-day free trial by using our code. Just go to mubi.com/cinema of meaning or click the link in the description below. That's mubi.com/cinema of meaning. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what it's about, and then we can dive into kind of also on top of everything we already mentioned, there is this undercurrent that really the film opens with. It doesn't conceal its sort of meditative philosophical musings either. It kind of wears those right on its sleeve. I'm sure we're going to get into that, but we can lay the groundwork for sort of the plot that's going on, and then talk about kind of the thematic elements that it's directly exploring through this story. The opening has a montage of different parts of Texas. There's some voiceover from a sheriff. And then we see Llewellyn. We're introduced to a different character who is hunting, and he stumbles upon some money, or he stumbles upon a gang cartel drug dispute, a deal gone bad or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of dead bodies and cars out in the desert, and he finds some money and he takes it. This kind of sets in motion the rest of the plot. So Llewellyn finds this money and takes it, and then you have Anton Chigurh, who is chasing him, and then you have the Mexican cartel, who are also chasing Llewellyn. And then you have a third guy who is chasing Llewellyn and also maybe Chigurh. So you have multiple people.
That was the Woody Harrelson character, right?
The Woody Harrelson character.
Yeah.
And then you have the Tommy Lee Jones character, who is the sheriff, who is also kind of aware of what's going on and is sort of trying to piece all this together and see what's happening.
Yeah.
So it's this very like, there's layers of cat and mouse and chasing. But the main line we follow is Llewellyn on the run, Chigurh chasing him, and then the sheriff kind of chasing both of them on the tail. But maybe the central character is Anton Chigurh himself.
Yeah, I think so too. Yet I'm still not sure how he, like, I think I have an understanding of what his character represents metaphorically, but at least maybe I didn't as close attention as I should have, but I wasn't sure how exactly he fits into the actual plot of the movie. Like, because he arrives at the crime scene with two other guys who he then ends up killing, and then he kind of goes off on his own. But I wasn't sure, was he hired to get the money and then kind of went all Joker and decided, I'm going to burn it all down? Or I'm not sure. Is that made any clearer? Did I miss something there? Or
I'm also not sure which party he's working for exactly, because he doesn't seem to be working in concert with the Mexican cartel or the Woody Harrelson character, who is hired by this anonymous business guy. I think it's structured kind of intentionally so that there's just forces at play outside of the vision of the film, and specifically the sheriff and Llewellyn, whose perspective we kind of come into the story through. And a big theme that's played out, at least through kind of the sheriff's perspective and his voiceover and dialogue, is this feeling of change and sort of a moral turning, where the sheriff is feeling like he's encountering a world that he doesn't understand, where there's kind of a loss of logic to it and just evil kind of happens. I do think there's ambiguity there, perhaps on purpose, where it's just like, I mean, we come in at the beginning where Llewellyn takes the money, but the deal has already gone bad. You know, Chigurh it already feels like he's on the road. I think that scene where he strangles the police officer happens even before Llewellyn takes the money. I don't remember. Do you remember?
Yeah, he seems to be arrested for some other issue unrelated to the rest of the plot of the movie. But yeah, I'm not sure if that signifies anything or was just the introduction to his character. But yeah, strange. We
don't really know who or what he is. You have a pretty good idea of what he represents. I think that that lack of like concrete understanding of where he's coming from or who he's working for plays into that feeling that he's almost more of this like metaphysical symbolic force than just like hitman.
I think he's described as a ghost somewhere at some point in the movie.
Yeah.
But that's a thing that the Coen Brothers have done before, right? I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, for example, also has this kind of menacing evil villain that's just seems to be like pure evil. There's not the way they tend to depict villainous characters are just not as these misunderstood or empathetic characters, but they really are something that is beyond our, or tends to be beyond our understanding and beyond any kind of relatability, really, which is fascinating, but also, deliberately alienating and quite frightening, I guess, in that sense.
To me, one of the main themes that's being explored here is this idea of kind of determinism, predestination. One of the famous scenes from the movie is a moment where we're kind of introduced to just how screwed up and sort of psychopathic the Shiger character is this moment where he comes into the gas station and he sort of places the life of the gas station attendant on a coin flip. Cormac McCarthy's dialogue really comes through in a lot of places in this movie, the author of the book that it was based on. And there's a lot of lines in here that are just like really interesting and fun on their own right.
Yeah, I like how the gas attendant is like, I need to know what I stand to win, or I didn't put nothing up. And Anton Chigurh, he replies, yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know.
He also says something about like, I got here the same way the coin did.
That's in the final scene, right? That he.
Oh, is that in the final?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think in this one, this is where he says, he goes on to ask, you know what date is on this coin? And the gas station guy is like, no. And then he replies, 1958, it's been traveling 22 years to get here, and now it's here, and it's either heads or tails, and you have to say it. Call it.
Yeah.
And he stands to win everything.
Which is a little bit of a misnomer. I think it's probably more accurate to say he stands to lose everything. It's an interesting game that he sets up, and it kind of sets up the theme that the movie is exploring, this tension, which comes back at the end of Shiger is treating kind of the world as this deterministic space where things happen, there's cause and effect. And that relates very closely to how the movie feels is structured. Like we watch a lot, it's very procedural. We see this thing happen and then this thing happens. And then because of that, this thing happens. There's long stretches where there's not a lot of dialogue and we just see characters kind of doing what they need to do to get from one moment to the next and trying to just play out the chase or the investigation or whatever it is. And so the whole movie has this feeling of just process of cause and effect of sort of physics. I was thinking when I was trying to understand why this movie is entertaining, even though it just feels like kind of things playing out in a way that you know they're going to happen. I was thinking, I don't know, when I was a kid, we would go to these science museums in America and they would have, or sometimes you would see them at like a mall or something. There would be these big things and they're a big like plastic vortex and you can put a coin in a slot and the coin goes in and it just like rolls around and it like spins on its edge towards the center and it eventually drops into a hole. And you can put multiple coins in and they'll like both go around together. And I was thinking about, for some reason, I was thinking about that in relation to this movie and about the fact that for some reason, it's in those scenarios, it's fun to just watch physics play out. Like, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know the coin is going to drop down in and spin around and you know it's going to drop into the hole. And as it gets closer, it just speeds up. But it's mesmerizing for whatever reason, even though there's no inherent drama in it. Or there is, I don't know, maybe there is. Maybe it feels like the coin is...
drama of physics,
Yeah.
I think it's also just from a more storytelling perspective, it's just, at least that's something I noticed watching it now, is that it's pretty cleverly written too. Like, it doesn't feel like the characters are making stupid mistakes or that they're doing like contrived things to force a conflict. Like, it always feels like everyone is at the top of their game. Like, even with Llewellyn, you can kind of argue like, oh, maybe not take the money, but he doesn't seem like some down on his luck idiot who stumbles upon this cash and stupidly takes it. Like, he plans it all out, he anticipates the consequences, he tries to get everything into place as best as he can, like, and then you quickly come to learn like he's experienced, like he's not a stranger to conflict and violence. He knows how to hide himself and he knows when there's a risk involved, like when he goes back to the motel and he senses that something's wrong, like he drives around and he goes to someplace else. Like, it never feels like anyone is doing something truly reckless.
Yeah.
Which kind of adds to the whole suspense of it all. You feel like you're identifying with everyone who's making the smartest possible mistake or smartest possible choice, which in a way makes it only more exciting when you're anticipating how these forces will eventually collide with each other, because you're genuinely wondering, okay, who's going to drop the ball and what's going to happen, or how's it going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that I just really appreciated this time around. And probably also when I watched it the first time, even though I wasn't sure exactly why I enjoyed it so much back then.
Right. Yeah. To that point, both Shiger and Llewellyn kind of seem to have a similar attitude where, like, even if you could argue, oh, he shouldn't have taken the money or whatever, Llewellyn seems to have this attitude of like, well, I did, and so now this is the path I have to take. He never questions that. It's always just, this is what happened, and so now I need to do this. And yeah, and they're all three factors, the sheriff, the Shiger, and Llewellyn, are all very good at what they're doing. Like you do genuinely feel like either of them could come out on top, which I think makes how the movie actually ends very interesting, but we'll save that for a little bit later. But I guess going back to something that I wanted to mention with that coin scene is this dichotomy that's set up between fate or deterministic predestination, fate, determinism, and Shiger's trying to force this issue of like, the coin has decided, but yet there's also this little tiny element of choice or the illusion of choice in making the other person call the coin, where there's this choice of, do you call heads or tails? And in some way that has this element of placing their fate in their hands, but there's also the question that comes into play at the end that we'll talk about eventually is, can you choose just to not play the game at all? And so, yeah, there's a very concise, I think, setup within that moment of kind of the ideas that the movie is trying to explore.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at it literally, the whole coin scene is obviously kind of cruel and a non-choice, really, because, you know, Anton, he presents it as if this is fate and you have to pick, otherwise you're gonna die. But from a logical point of view, you know, that's not the real choice. Like, it's not actual fate that's presenting you with this choice. It's another dude standing in front of you who's in that sense, it's just like you're giving into his perverted sense of giving his victims a choice. Like, that kind of it changes the dynamic a little bit. But I think you're meant to look at it as more metaphorically, because his whole character, as we already talked about, clearly functions as this more metaphorical figure. In that sense, the coin game kind of reminded me of the chess game in The Seventh Seal, which where you have this crusader playing against death itself, which is a more literal metaphorical representation of turning the issues of life or the existential issues of life into a game, and how we play that game kind of reveals something about how we then approach life as well. And in that sense, I think No Country for Old Men also talks or says something about the way we tend to act in the face of fate, or, you know, greater circumstances beyond our control or beyond our comprehension even. I think in that sense, it seems to argue that, because you have basically, you know, you have two choices, but you have like three outcomes. You choose either to call it or not to call it. Not calling it leads to death. But if you call it, you have two outcomes where you either win and you walk away with your life, or you lose and you also end in death. So you have, of the three outcomes, only one results in life. But for that, the necessary condition is that you do play the game. So it seems to argue that not playing is by definition equal to losing.
Right. Yeah.
What that means beyond that, I'm not exactly sure, but that's kind of the dynamics that it presents.
The question there is kind of like, actual fate would be like this element beyond man, humans in a sense. And Shiger presenting call the coin decides whether you live or die, is this false, it's like a false determinism. You choosing to play the game might be necessary in order to live, but only because he's constructing this like world in which those are the rules. He's trying to decide the rules, which is contrary, I think, to the actual idea of true fate or true determinism, which would be like your choice doesn't even actually enter into it. So, and I do think the movie is ultimately kind of messing around with those ideas, because Shigur as a character kind of gets undercut by the end. Part of the brilliance of the movie is that I think it's not just slipping into this overly simplified, like, oh, here's a conflict between fate and free will, and which one of those is going to win. It's much messier than that. That's an element of it that I really appreciate.
Yeah. It might also be why the movie begins with a pretty strong thematic proposition in a way. So the last part of the opening monologue is Tommy Lee Jones's character saying, "The crime you see now, it's hard to even take its measure. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I always knew you had to be willing to die to even do this job, but I don't want to push my chips forward and go out and meet something I don't understand. A man would have to put his soul at hazard. He'd have to say, okay, I'll be part of this world." I do really love that last bit there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that seems to me like a clear sort of thesis on, he literally says to be part of this world is in part to surrender yourself to something that you don't understand, to meddle in forces beyond your control and beyond your understanding. But then at the very end, when you're supposedly getting the closing monologue or the closing statement, as it were, he doesn't really say anything that makes sense in a direct or literal way, because he basically just describes a dream he had, or two dreams actually, which really baffled me the first time I watched it. It was like, to me, that there was nothing more surprising in that movie than the sudden cut to black after he says, "Then I woke up." But yeah, I think the dreams at the end, I'm not sure what to make of the first one, or why there is even a first one that he describes. He says, he talks about meeting his dad in town somewhere. He's going to give me some money. I think I lost it. Might be a vague reference to the plot as a whole, but I'm not sure. But then in the second one, he describes being this kind of old-timey cowboy sheriff-ish figure, riding with his dad, who is, and they're going through this mountain pass through the dark, and his dad is the one who has this light, fire in a horn, he describes it. And then he sort of his dad goes ahead, and or the Tommy Lee Jones character, he imagines he's going to go ahead and make a fire somewhere, and that whenever he would arrive, his dad would be there and all would be fine. But then, that's when he wakes up. That actual moment doesn't come.
Happen.
Yeah. For years, I didn't know what that scene meant, but I'm not sure you're supposed to add a too specific of a meaning to it. I like that it's, dreams in general are always, even if they relate to some part of our unconscious that we're struggling with, there's always this big element of randomness that kind of fascinates me.
Yeah.
And which I think also applies here. So I'm not trying to add too much of a literal allegorical meaning, so to say, to it, but it does kind of invoke that feeling of him hoping there'll be some guiding light ahead that's gonna resolve everything, but then every time you're about to reach it, you wake up from the dream and it's never quite there.
That functions well as sort of a microcosm for the film in a sense too, where often, as viewers, we might hope for some kind of fate or light or hope outside of the framework of what we see just happening on screen, of kind of what I think Shigur is trying to represent, or thinks he represents, or does represent, which is just like, oh, I'm just fate playing things out, and you stepped in it, so now you die, is kind of the vibe I get there. Carla Jean at the end, in choosing not to call it, I think is kind of, to me, that's also that little element of faith of like, I'm not going to try to take my fate into my hands. I'm going to have this like little kernel of faith that fate in the fate beyond Shigur or whatever. There's different ways of interpreting that, but that's how it kind of feels to me.
Like she's appealing to a force beyond Shigur. That's what you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that idea is kind of in the film a little bit in other ways too. There's that line about, I forget who says it, but somebody says, you might even say he has principles, talking about Shigur, you might even say he has principles. I think it's Woody Harrelson's character that transcend drugs or money or any of that. They allude towards this idea that he's playing out some kind of what he sees as some kind of moralistic force
Yeah.
of fate beyond just, oh, I'm recovering this money for, my team or whatever.
And that's why he shows up at Carla Jean's in the first place, right? Because
Right,
the story's pretty much over, but it's only because Llewellyn, he made a bad choice way before he died, and so now Anton is kind of still following up on him, even though
Yes.
Llewellyn is already dead and the money is either recovered at that point or clearly lost forever. But he only seems to be there for just out of it some kind of self-contrived principle that has no bearing on the actual outcome of the reason he was in the story for the first place. Which
Yeah.
I guess that says something about what his character is or the kind of principles that he at least thinks he holds on to. But yeah.
You talked about the cut to black after the dream and that being kind of this like shocking subversion. I think the other one for me that hits particularly hard is Llewellyn's death and how that happens, where I talked about it at the beginning. You have this really extensive, elaborate kind of set piece where I don't know how long it is in the film. It's maybe 20 minutes. It feels long because you're very on edge, but Llewellyn is going to these different hotels and Chigurh is chasing him and he comes up to the door and they're like, there's a couple near misses and they're having shootouts. And for a long time, you're really invested in this chase between them. Ultimately, that doesn't resolve in the way that we want it to, which would be one of them winning and getting to see one of them win. Instead, we just find Llewellyn dead with the sheriff with not a lot of fanfare, and it turns out the cartel got to him and Chigurh didn't. And that move to me is another one that really undercuts kind of the idea that like Chigurh is actually this arbiter of like fate, that he's kind of trying to be that, but is a false version of that in a sense, because he is ultimately undercut by this sort of ultimate fate. Llewellyn does make a bad choice. He does make a choice by taking the money that will ultimately lead to his death, but not at the hand of Chigurh. Chigurh isn't the one who ultimately is like the arbiter of that. It's like, I don't know if in the Coen's mind it's like God or whatever. There's some force out there that's like bigger than Chigurh that kind of is pulling the strings and orchestrating things.
Yeah.
You can kind of see that in the car crash at the end, I think, too.
Yeah, but did he survive that? He kind of walked away and it's left.
Yeah, he breaks his bone and
ambiguous whether or not he's gonna collapse or collapse to his injuries or recover from it. And he's shown being wounded before and he kind of just recovers and moves on.
Yeah.
But maybe this one got him.
Maybe that one got him. Ultimately, what takes him out is not the sheriff or Llewellyn or, any of the forces that are like we're invested in within the film. It's just some random person who runs a stop sign or, whatever it is.
Red traffic light. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the death of Llewellyn, that's the second after the ending, the second big subversive moment that really got to me when I first watched it. I was like, wait, is that the main character? Is he dead
on the floor? Yeah.
Wait, what? I think I actually ended up rewinding the movie. Like, because did I miss something? Did my DVD break or something? What's going on here?
It's not just what happens; it's the way they present that moment that really, really like undercuts any like satisfaction that Llewellyn dying would traditionally have narratively within a movie like this.
Yeah, it happens off screen.
Yeah,
we don't, because I think it's the sheriff who drives up to the motel and he just sees the cartel Mexicans leaving, and that he kind of walks onto the scene, and then it's everything's already over, and Llewellyn is already dead, and there's not even like a last gasp of breath or like a tell Carla Jean I love her or whatever.
Yeah.
He's just like at that point he's just like meat, like he's just a corpse. And that to me, when I first watched it, that was the most sobering moment, I guess, for me. It's like, oh, even a main character can just randomly die, like he's an extra in his own movie almost, or like a henchman in in one of those Austin Powers movies.
Yeah.
Which I both didn't like it at first, as well as was intrigued by it. But I think thematically it's very effective at just undercutting both the sense of self-importance that Llewellyn has in his thinking, like, oh, I'm a Vietnam vet, like I can fix this, I can take on the cartel, I can take on Sigurd, I can wiggle my way out of this. But it's also kind of undercutting the audience's perception, or as we tend to identify with the main character, and so we tend to anticipate some kind of resolution for us through the main character, which in this case doesn't really happen. Which again confirms that, we are just sort of submissive to these greater forces or God or whatever you want to call it in this movie.
It undercuts our expectations. It undercuts Shigur as well, who has had this attitude of, he kills the Woody. The Woody Harrelson character knows where the money is, and Shigur kills him because he's so sure that it's going to be brought to him by...
Oh, yeah. Who did he refer to at that moment? Did he expect Llewellyn to come and deliver it at his feet, or was he
I'm pretty sure it was Llewellyn
Yeah, because at that point he was threatening Carla Jean and her mom, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the money just disappears. We don't know who ends up with it.
Yeah.
Presumably, maybe the Mexican cartel, maybe Shigur got it. We just see that it's by the time the sheriff shows up and goes looking for it, it's gone from the hotel that Llewellyn dies in.
Didn't Llewellyn throw it over the bridge on the border somewhere, or was it implied that he did something like that? Or
yes, but then it's also implied that he gets it back. So he throws it over there. The Woody Harrelson character finds it there, so that's why he knows where it is, and he goes and tells Shigur that he can, or Shigur captures Woody Harrelson's character. He says, "I know where it is. I can take you to it." Shigur's like, no, kills him because he expects Llewellyn to pick it up and bring it back. And then we have that shot of like, there's the great open in the hotel, and we can see that there's like scrape marks where it would have been placed there and removed. So presumably Llewellyn did pick it back up and take it to the hotel, but then somebody took it out of there, and we never really find out who did. But it is a horribly unsatisfying movie, I think, especially the first time you watch it, for those reasons. I don't think you're supposed to like that three-pronged punch of like Llewellyn dying with zero fanfare, and then Shigur just walking off down the street and never knowing what happens to him, never finding out what happens to the money. Even the scene with Carla Jean where we presume she doesn't call the coin toss, and then Shigur kills her. We don't even see that, so like we don't know what happens there or exactly how it happens. And then the sheriff just retires and tells a story of his dreams, and it cuts to black. It's like this series of cascading unresolved ambiguity that is genuinely, I think, pretty, like, I was unsatisfied and uncomfortable, and that's also what you described. But it touches that, it touches on that feeling that the sheriff is getting at with that last dream that you have when you have a dream like that, where you just wake up and then whatever the promise of this dream is like this unresolved narrative, and you can't go back to sleep and find out what happens. It just lingers there.
Yeah.
And that feeling is closely related to this feeling of not understanding sort of the what those forces are at play, or not being able to control them. And so that to me, like, is where the movie really succeeds, is in kind of tapping into that feeling and connecting it to that lack of that feeling of not understanding, or that lack of understanding that we have.
Yeah, I agree. To what extent do you think that Tommy Lee Jones, the sheriff character, was actually the main character? Because we do begin and we end with him, even though he seems to be more of an observer during the middle part of the movie. He doesn't actually he doesn't do anything, as far as I can remember, specific with regards to the whole conflict. Like, he doesn't intervene. He's kind of on the tail end of it, kind of trying to piece it together, but he doesn't actually set anything into motion or intervene at any specific moment, really. There's that one moment where he's about to enter the motel room, and you see this shot of Anton Chigurh kind of hiding in the shadows, but then it's revealed that he is not there, that the shot was like maybe in Tommy Lee Jones's character's mind, that he was thinking like, oh, he could be there, could not be there. I do like someone else on, I think it was an old video essay on the movie. I don't remember which one, but someone pointed out that Tommy Lee Jones, he notices the keyhole being punched out as happens with all the other locks. But then because the doorknob is in the dark and the light is coming from the inside, the round hole, it kind of resembles, because the doorknob is made from copper, so the light that's reflected through it kind of takes on the shape of a coin, because it has that same golden aura. And then you have Tommy Lee Jones, what's his name in the movie? Tom Bell? Yeah. Anyways, the sheriff is... You have him standing on the outside of the door, and he's basically basically the one who has to call it in that moment. Like, is Anton Chigurh gonna be there? Is it gonna be like heads, or is he gone? And am I safe? Is it tails or whatever?
Yeah.
And turns out he turns out not to be there, and he's fine. But again, that also means he doesn't really. There's no interaction between him and everything else that seems to be going on.
Yeah. That element of him calling it is also interesting when you place it in juxtaposition to the opening kind of thesis that you read, where he talks about going out and encountering something and losing your soul because you encounter this thing that you don't understand. I don't know what the implication of that is necessarily, but in that moment, he's literally choosing to he ultimately doesn't, but he's choosing to possibly come face to face with that thing, because Chigurh is kind of this representation, I think, of that dismal tide. I think one character calls it, or like that specific sort of nebulous, not understandable evil that seems like evil for evil's sake instead of for some kind of purpose, is that Tommy Lee Jones is kind of talking about, I think, is sort of what Anton Chigurh represents, at least partially. And so that moment is where they would be coming face to face. And Tommy Lee Jones, in the context of thinking that, encountering that, looking that thing in the face might cost you your soul, is flipping the coin with not only his life potentially, but also his soul somehow in his thinking.
But it also seems to be like a necessary element in order to be like, you have to call it, or you reject yourself from this world, because that's what the opening lines is like. He says the man who goes in and meets something that he doesn't understand, he is the one who puts his soul at hazard. He is the one who'd have to say, okay, I'll be part of this world.
Yeah.
And I think there's another conversation between the sheriff and some other kind of like old-timer dude who where the sheriff, he kind of goes on about like, oh, back in the day things used to be simpler, that's when it made sense, and now everything's different. But that argument is also kind of countered by this other dude who's this old man who's saying that he kind of recounts this story from 1909 or whatever, like some way back in the day moment that was similarly senseless in kind of to point out like, okay, what you're seeing today, that's nothing new. The world's always been like this, which to me was interesting. The literal line, by the way, is what you got ain't nothing new. This country's hard on people. You can't stop what's coming. It ain't all waiting on you.
Yeah.
That's vanity.
Yeah.
So that, to me at least, kind of reframed that initial thesis where it says like, it's almost becomes more of a moral imperative that you have to call it anyways. Like, to reject the call is to reject yourself from the world, and that in the end would be like an act of vanity, because that's to say like, oh, maybe I don't understand this world as it is now. Maybe, you're expecting something that is not for you to have. Like you're expecting some kind of understanding of the world that you'll never get. And so in that sense, it almost becomes like a moral imperative to say, okay, I'm going to call it and I'm going to put my soul at hazard, but for better or worse, I'm going to be part of the world. That to me is, at least this time around, what I got out of the movie the most, and which really for me kind of wraps up that whole existential layer.
Yes, yeah.
It vaguely reminded me of the Tree of Life, even, where you have the Sean Penn character who's almost present in the background, mostly in the beginning and then again towards the end, like similarly to the sheriff. And then it's more of the in-between story that metaphorically signifies his journey from, I don't understand this world, I'm detached from it, disconnected, and in the end he finds some kind of reconnection, or at least some kind of peace with being given what he is, or being, peace with the world as it is, so to say.
Yeah, yeah. He's the main character in the sense that that's the perspective of the film, of the story. We kind of see it through his lens, not necessarily at every moment, because we obviously see literal events on screen that he doesn't, but kind of philosophically, and the perspective of the story comes through him. And yeah, ultimately he's the one who has an arc. I don't think like Shigur and basically none of the other characters have a character arc. They just kind of have this linear trajectory that they're all on. But the sheriff does seem to have like decisions that he's making, or I mean, the other characters make decisions, I guess, but he's the one who's weighing this like moral conflict instead of just staying to a specific principle. Even like Llewellyn, every time he makes a decision, and same with Shigur, it doesn't seem like they're really like sitting down and, okay, I'm going to think over what are the implications of this. They're just, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. They make a decision because
like the physics things that you
the
physics thing that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. But the sheriff lies in contrast to that, where he seems to be weighing the implication of everything. And I think that might position him more as, the heart of the film in a sense.
Yeah. At least he's kind of the reflective side of it all. You have these very mechanical pieces, and he is the one who's trying to figure out how it works and what that signifies, the way it plays out, or something like that.
I hadn't really made that connection that you had with that kind of existentialist thread, but I see that there now that you talk about it, and I think that's a good point to highlight. I can see that in the middle. You can watch this movie and say, I disagree. That's not what the world is like. You can say like, it is all just predetermined, or we do have this very clear choice, or there is a God that gives everything meaning, and he'll make sure that Anton Chigurh gets his due, and he, God's pulling all the strings, and Llewellyn dies because it's moral retribution for taking drug money or like whatever. You can kind of disagree with this feeling that the movie gives you, that it's just like forces colliding together and then stuff happens because of that. Is kind of the feeling I think the movie captures. But you can also just kind of rest into an acceptance of not knowing, which is sort of what the sheriff does, which is also a very existentialist maneuver of just kind of saying there might be a light up ahead, like the father might be waiting down the path with the campfire. You can even hope for that, but I woke up and so I don't know. And, that's...
Didn't he also, at some point, he mentions about that as he grew older, he expected God to come into his life somehow. And then he just didn't. Like, he does really seem to be struggling with that lack of meaning. He just kind of assumed, like, things would fall into place as he grew older. And then it just didn't. And that is kind of the whole crux of the thematic storyline there, I think. I do want to mention that I feel it's sometimes easy to say like, oh, it's so existential. It's about learning to accept what's not what you don't know. But it's not so much the theme itself that I find interesting here, but also just the way it's executed, the way it's given form. I like that the Coen Brothers still use this very compelling, very suspenseful cat and mouse game to kind of keep your attention, keep you engaged. I love all the secondary characters. They really seem to pick these strange Texas people with weathered faces that really give a lot of texture and character to the world. And a lot of them, they're just memorable in their own right. They don't feel like extras. They feel like they've been deliberately picked and for these small but definitely not insignificant parts. So yeah, and yeah, I think it knows exactly when to just hold your attention in a conventional sense and when to subvert it. You've talked about the three-prong assault on your expectations almost. Which is it's just enough to like, and with the little pieces of dialogue in between, it's just enough to create like this compelling story while also one that intrigues you into kind of reflecting back on it, on what exactly it meant, and trying to search for like something deeper beneath the surface. And for me at least, it was a pretty rewarding exercise to do so. And but to me, made this movie still worth watching today.
I agree. There's a lot of movies that try to do that thing. It's really easy to say it's unsatisfying, and that's because life is unsatisfying. It's like, it's supposed to be bad, but that's not what this movie is doing, or this movie is just doing that actually really well, doing it in a way that is ultimately unsatisfying in how it creates a feeling of dissatisfaction with the narrative. So I think you're absolutely correct in saying that theme is one that I think a lot of films try to explore, but very few do interestingly or effectively as this one does. And I'll add to everything that you mentioned. The performance, especially from Tommy Lee Jones, is really captivating to me. And then also, this is the benefit of adapting material from a really great author like Cormac McCarthy, but just I love a movie that dialogue isn't everything in a film. There's so much else going on in a movie, but there's so many pieces of just beautiful dialogue that are so well performed, especially from the sheriff in this movie, that I really love. He has that kind of like, he has a very specific form of wit in a lot of his lines that I've only ever experienced in real life from guys like that I would have met growing up, who were just like old, crusty, kind of weathered Southern guys. Yeah. And they just had this, like, their whole being moved kind of slowly, but their brain was so sharp. Yes, yeah, exactly. I love this character because there's not many like him in film.
If there's one modern follow-up, I would maybe say it's Hell or High Water, which kind of reminded me, at least in terms of like vibe. I don't think it has the same exact themes going on, but it has that same kind of rugged look at the American South. It is Midwest, kind of the Texas region.
Texas is kind of its own. Texas is kind of its own thing. No, that's another good one. I haven't watched that one in a while, but it also captures that.
I think it has one of the same, the actress that works as a waitress in a restaurant that has that famous line with, like, "What don't you want?" when she's trying to serve the sheriff in Hell or High Water. I think that's the same actress that played the motel receptionist.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I haven't checked it, but she kind of looked like it anyways. Would be funny though.
There is some little streak of commentary on like money and capitalism as a source of some of this kind of evil that's happening. It is money that sets the whole thing in motion. There's this kind of symbolism of the coin, and there's various things. Adam Naiman, in his essay in his Coen Brothers book, talks a lot about that and kind of lays some of that out. But I don't know if I know enough of the pieces to really put that together. And I mean, that's just kind of a theme that runs through a lot of movies that kind of explore, a lot of movies that I would class as kind of postmodern, in the sense that they're kind of exploring subverting modern narratives, which I think this movie is doing pretty well.
I think that's something that might be more clearer in a movie like Hell or High Water, which focuses more on the poverty that's present in that world, so to say, and also plays more into the motives of the characters that we have there, the bank robbers, who I'm not sure exactly what the plot was. They had to pay off a loan or something, or to prevent
something like
the
that.
bank from taking a house or something. Like, it's clearly like maybe a before and after financial crisis movie.
Right.
But I think that's a nice double feature in case you have you want to rewatch No Country for Old Men and you want to kind of keep that vibe going with something newer, then that's a nice might be a nice combo.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support our Patreon. That's at patreon.com/cinemaofmeaning. When you join our Patreon, you get access to our Discord community where you can chat with other listeners and us about episodes. You'll know what we're watching in the future so that you can watch with us. You can also listen to our bonus episodes on Nebula. We have a monthly episode where we cover an additional movie every month. We've talked about Drive, Primer, 2001: A Space Odyssey, a whole bunch of movies at this point. You can check those all out on Nebula for Nebula listeners. The best way to get that is with the Curiosity Stream bundle. If you don't have that, go to curiositystream.com/cinemaofmeaning. Check out the links in the description below. You also get ad-free and early access to the regular episodes when you listen on Nebula, so that's a pretty good deal. So thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next week.